70% of your fuel is wasted before you leave the driveway. Not your engine, not your car, you. Japanese engineers figured this out decades ago, built it into an entire driving culture. The rest of the world kept paying at the pump and blaming gas prices. 15 habits, cost nothing. I tested every single one. Stay with me. The last method is what a retired Toyota engineer called the highest impact fuel behavior any driver can adopt. You've never heard it, nobody teaches it, and it's costing you thousands. Let's blow this open. Number 15, the cold engine secret. The way you treat your engine in the first 90 seconds of every drive is costing you more fuel than almost any other single behavior, and the loss is invisible because it happens before you have driven a single mile. When a cold engine starts, the fuel injection system operates in an open loop enrichment mode. The ECU does not yet have valid data from the oxygen sensors, which require heat to function, so it defaults to a rich fuel mixture that delivers significantly more fuel than the engine actually needs. This enrichment mode is necessary and unavoidable. What determines how long it lasts is how quickly the engine reaches operating temperature, and what determines that is how you drive in the first 2 minutes. The saving across a daily commute compounds quickly. 5 minutes of stationary enrichment mode idling every morning across 250 working days represents fuel consumption that generates 0 miles. Eliminating it recovers both the fuel and the mileage that idling was consuming invisibly every morning before the drive even began. That secret addressed what happens before the drive starts. What comes next targets the single driving input you make more than any other during every journey. Number 14, the invisible accelerator. Secret: Japanese high mileage drivers treat the accelerator pedal as if there is a raw egg between their foot and the floor, not because they are timid, because they understand something about fuel delivery that most Western drivers have never been told. The Japanese method prescribes a throttle application so smooth and so gradual that the ECU never detects a rate of change significant enough to trigger enrichment. The pedal moves, the vehicle accelerates, but the acceleration curve is spread over a longer time period at a lower fuel cost per unit of speed gained. Practicing this on a single commute produces a measurable fuel economy improvement that appears on the trip computer before the drive is finished. The egg is imaginary. The fuel saving is real. Now what you just learned controls the fuel going in. The next secret controls something most drivers waste completely without realizing it is worth more than the fuel in the tank. If this is already changing how you think about every drive, hit that like button and subscribe now. 13 more secrets are coming, and each one stacks on top of the last, so you do not want to miss a single one. Number 13, the kinetic energy hack. Every time you brake, you are burning money, not metaphorically. The vehicle you are decelerating represents kinetic energy that your engine burned fuel to create. When you apply the brakes, that kinetic energy converts to heat in the brake rotors and disappears into the atmosphere. The fuel that created it is gone. The speed it produced is gone, and the engine will burn more fuel to rebuild that speed after the stop. The calculation that produces 50% fuel savings across a drive is largely built on this single behavior, repeated at every deceleration event across the entire journey. Every coast that replaces a brake event is free deceleration. Every brake event that replaces a coast is paid deceleration followed by paid reacceleration. Learn to read traffic 200 meters ahead instead of 20. The distance between those two numbers is the distance between average fuel economy and the kind of numbers Japanese test drivers produce on public roads. That secret protects the energy your fuel already created. The next one targets the moment most drivers unknowingly signal their engine to prepare for maximum fuel consumption before they have even moved. Number 12, the idle elimination. The Japanese automotive efficiency philosophy has a specific term for the practice of allowing a vehicle to idle unnecessarily. It is considered waste in the same category as a manufacturing defect, and the attitude toward it among Japanese high-mileage drivers is correspondingly unforgiving. Every minute of unnecessary idling is pure fuel consumption with zero transportation output. Japanese high-mileage drivers eliminate every unnecessary idle event from their driving pattern with the same discipline they apply to throttle inputs and braking behavior. What to do? Engine off at railroad crossings. Engine off during school pickup waits. Engine off at drive-through queues that are not moving. The threshold in the Japanese method is simple. If the stationary period is longer than 60 seconds, the engine should be off. Below 60 seconds, the fuel cost of restarting exceeds the fuel saved by shutting down. Above 60 seconds, every second the engine runs is waste. You have now learned how to protect fuel from being wasted at rest. What comes next will change how you look at every hill, every overpass, and every freeway on-ramp you have ever driven as something the Japanese method turns into a fuel-saving tool hiding in plain sight. Number 11, the elevation secret. Every hill your route contains is a fuel management event. Most Western drivers treat hills as passive terrain that the engine responds to. Japanese high-mileage drivers treat every hill as a fuel tool that the driver actively manages in both directions. On the approach to a downhill grade, the Japanese method prescribes building speed to the upper edge of the legal limit before the crest if traffic conditions safely permit. The vehicle then carries that speed down the grade and into the flat that follows, coasting with closed throttle the entire descent. Fuel consumption during a downhill coast in gear is effectively zero. The grade is doing the work the engine would otherwise pay for. Arriving at the bottom of the grade with higher speed means the engine requires less fuel to maintain highway speed on the flat that follows. On the approach to an uphill grade, the same logic applies in reverse. Carry speed into the climb rather than maintaining a fixed throttle position as the grade increases and speed bleeds away. Allowing a controlled speed reduction on the climb at a maintained gentle throttle position costs less fuel than applying progressive throttle to fight the grade and maintain speed. The hill is not an obstacle, it is a partner. The Japanese method trains drivers to manage both sides of every elevation change as a fuel transaction rather than a passive terrain event. That secret weaponizes the road's own geometry. The next one addresses something sitting inside your engine right now that Japan's efficiency research identified as responsible for a continuous fuel penalty that never shows up on a diagnostic scan and never triggers a warning light. Number 10. The friction reduction. Inside your engine at this moment, every moving metal surface is in contact with an oil film that is either thick enough to keep those surfaces separated or thin enough to allow microscopic metal to metal contact. The difference between those two states is not a dramatic mechanical event. It is a continuous friction level that determines how much of your engine's combustion energy reaches the wheels rather than being absorbed as heat within the engine itself. The Japanese method is specific. Use the exact viscosity the manufacturer specifies. Not heavier, because heavy feels protective. Not lighter, because light feels efficient. The specified viscosity is the result of engineering analysis of the specific bearing clearances, the specific pump flow rates, and the specific operating temperatures of your exact engine. It is the viscosity at which internal friction is minimized while protection is maximized. Deviation in either direction costs fuel. You just learned what is happening inside the engine at the molecular level. What comes next is something happening outside the engine, a force acting on the exterior of your vehicle every second of every drive. Number 9. The invisible wall. Method. At 30 miles per hour, aerodynamic drag is a minor fuel consumer. At 60 miles per hour, that same drag has quadrupled. At 70 miles per hour, it has increased by a factor of more than 5 relative to the 30 miles per hour baseline. The relationship between speed and aerodynamic drag is not linear. It follows a square law, which means small increases in highway speed produce dramatically larger increases in the fuel required to overcome the air resistance those speed increases create. Japanese high-mileage drivers who use highway routes for significant portions of their commute manage their speed with this curve in mind. The few minutes lost by driving at 60 rather than 75 on a 30-minute highway segment are exchanged for a fuel saving that is visible on the trip computer before the drive ends. The invisible wall of air in front of your vehicle is always there. The Japanese method is about choosing not to fight it harder than necessary. That secret addressed what the air does to the outside of your vehicle. The next one addresses what the road surface does to the bottom of it. Through a contact point most drivers check only when something goes visibly wrong. Number 8. The contact patch method. Each of your 4 tires maintains a contact patch with the road surface roughly the size of an adult hand. The pressure inside that tire determines the shape of that contact patch and the rolling resistance that shape creates. An underinflated tire has a larger, more deformed contact patch that generates more rolling resistance per mile than a correctly inflated tire. That additional rolling resistance costs fuel continuously across every mile driven. The Japanese method prescribes checking tire pressure weekly before driving, when the tires are cold, against the specification on the door jam sticker, not the maximum pressure molded into the tire sidewall. Cold pressure is the accurate baseline. Hot pressure checked after driving reads higher due to thermal expansion and produces a false result that leads to underinflation relative to the specification. 4 minutes with a gauge every Sunday morning eliminates a fuel penalty that is otherwise paid silently on every mile of every drive. That secret addressed the tire's contact with the road. The next one targets something inside the drivetrain that Japanese engineers identified as responsible for a fuel penalty that grows progressively larger over time while producing no symptom obvious enough to send a driver to a shop. Number 7. The drivetrain. Drag technique between your engine and your wheels sit multiple fluid-filled mechanical systems, each of which creates resistance that the engine must overcome to move the vehicle forward. The transmission, the differential, and in all-wheel drive vehicles the transfer case all create drag that increases as their lubricating fluids degrade. Fresh transmission fluid and differential gear oil have a specific viscosity and additive package engineered to minimize internal friction while protecting the gear surfaces they lubricate. As those fluids age, the viscosity modifiers break down. The friction modifiers modifiers deplete and the fluid becomes progressively less effective at minimizing the resistance the drivetrain creates. Transmission fluid changed at the manufacturer-specified interval on a vehicle that has been operated on degraded fluid for 30,000 miles beyond its service point produces a measurable improvement in fuel economy within the first tank. The fluid was costing fuel every mile it was overdue. The change recovers that fuel cost going forward. You just learned about the friction hiding inside your drivetrain. What comes next is something happening in your combustion chamber that Japanese engineers identified as a fuel thief operating in plain sight inside an engine that diagnostics will report as completely healthy. Number 6. The combustion chamber. Method. Your engine's combustion chamber accumulates carbon deposits on the intake valves, the piston crowns, and the chamber walls over the course of normal operation. Those deposits do not trigger fault codes. They do not produce warning lights. They do not cause symptoms dramatic enough to send most drivers to a shop. What they do is reduce the effective compression ratio in the affected cylinders and create hotspots that advance ignition timing beyond the ECU's commanded value, forcing the knock sensor to retard timing to prevent detonation. The Japanese method addresses this through the use of fuel system cleaners at the manufacturer recommended interval, combined with the specific driving pattern that purges deposits most effectively, which is periodic sustained high-load operation rather than the exclusively light-load urban driving that allows deposits to accumulate fastest. A monthly drive segment at highway speed with moderate to firm throttle for 10 to 15 sustained minutes raises combustion temperature enough to burn off light carbon deposits before they harden into the layered accumulation that requires chemical intervention to address. That secret lives inside the combustion chamber. The next one acts on something you interact with every time you get in the vehicle, and the Japanese method's approach to it produces a fuel economy improvement that appears on the trip computer within the first 15 minutes of any drive. Number 5. The climate system. Secret. Your air conditioning compressor is a mechanical pump driven by a belt connected to your engine's crankshaft. Every time the compressor clutch engages, it adds a load to the engine that the engine must produce additional fuel to overcome. Japanese high-mileage drivers manage the climate system as a fuel consumer, rather than treating it as a background system that operates independently of fuel economy. The specific management technique involves using the recirculation mode for all extended air conditioning use. The secondary technique is using ventilation without air conditioning for the first 5 minutes of every drive in warm weather, allowing the interior to cool from motion-generated airflow before engaging the compressor. The compressor then cools an interior that is 10 to 15 degrees closer to the set temperature than it would have been at engagement, reducing the initial compressor load duration significantly. Recirculation and delayed compressor engagement cost nothing and produce a consistent fuel saving on every warm weather drive. That secret manages the biggest parasitic load on your engine. The next one targets a behavior that happens once per drive, and that Japanese fuel efficiency research identified as costing more fuel per minute than almost any other single driving event. Number 4. The warm shutdown method. Most drivers shut their engine off the moment they park. Japanese efficiency research identified a pattern in high-mileage drivers that contradicts this habit in a specific and measurable way, and the reason behind it has nothing to do with the shutdown moment itself, and everything to do with the cold start that follows it. The Japanese method prescribes a 60-second idle before shutdown, after any drive segment longer than 20 minutes. The idle allows coolant circulation to stabilize underhood temperature slightly before the cooling system stops circulating. The start that follows a properly cooled down shutdown runs slightly cleaner and slightly leaner than the start that follows an abrupt hot shutdown. Across a year of multiple daily starts, the cumulative fuel saving from cleaner cold starts adds to the total reduction the Japanese method produces. That secret changed what happens after the drive ends. What comes next targets something most drivers never connect to fuel economy at all, a habit that the Japanese efficiency system treats as one of the most important fuel management decisions made before the engine ever starts. Number 3. The load elimination method. Every kilogram of mass your vehicle carries requires fuel to accelerate, to maintain speed against rolling resistance, and to climb any elevation on your route. The average Western vehicle carries between 40 and 120 pounds of permanent cargo that serves no function, toolboxes that are never opened, sporting equipment from last season, emergency supplies that have expanded into permanent storage. Each of those items is paying a fuel toll on every mile of every drive. The routine is simple. Monthly, remove everything from the vehicle that is not required for that month's driving or for genuine emergency preparedness. Every unnecessary item removed is a permanent per-mile fuel saving that compounds across every subsequent mile until the item is replaced. The load elimination secret is the only one in this list that requires no behavioral change during the drive itself. The fuel saving happens automatically on every subsequent mile from the moment the excess weight leaves the vehicle. That secret lightened the vehicle before the drive began. What comes next is the method the retired Toyota test engineer identified as the single highest impact fuel saving behavior available to any drive. Number 2. The gear management secret. Japanese high-mileage drivers upshift earlier than any Western driving instruction recommends. Not marginally earlier, dramatically earlier. The Japanese efficiency method prescribes reaching the highest usable gear as quickly as driving conditions allow, and maintaining that gear at the lowest engine RPM that delivers adequate response without lugging the engine. The Japanese method in a manual transmission vehicle means reaching top gear by 40 miles per hour in normal traffic conditions. In an automatic transmission vehicle, it means using the lightest possible throttle input to encourage early upshifts and avoiding the kickdown events that drop 2 or 3 gears and spike RPM to deliver passing power that the traffic situation did not require. In a vehicle with a manual mode, it means managing gear selection actively to stay in the highest gear the current speed supports. The combined fuel saving from consistent high gear, low RPM operation applied across an entire daily commute produces trip computer readings that most Western drivers have never seen on a vehicle they own. That secret addressed how you use every gear in every mile. What remains is the method that synthesizes everything before it into a single practice that Japanese efficiency researchers found to be the master behavior underlying every high mileage result they ever documented, and it is going to sound almost too simple when you hear it. Method number 1, the anticipation secret. The retired Toyota test engineer's answer to the question of what separates the drivers who achieve extraordinary fuel economy from the drivers who do not was a single word: anticipation. Not technique, not maintenance. Anticipation. The Japanese efficiency system teaches drivers to extend their visual horizon from the immediate traffic situation to the traffic situation as it will exist in the next 30 seconds, the next 60 seconds, and for experienced practitioners, the next 2 to 3 minutes of their route. This extended visual horizon creates the reaction time necessary to apply every other secret in this list. You cannot coast to a stop if you see the red light at 50 meters. You can coast to a stop if you see it at 200 meters. You cannot manage a hill as a fuel tool if you see it at the base. You can manage it if you see it from a quarter mile out. Anticipation is the master skill because it is the prerequisite for every other fuel-saving behavior. A driver with perfect throttle technique but no anticipation will still make sharp brake inputs because the situations that demand them will arrive faster than the technique can respond to them smoothly. A driver with strong anticipation and imperfect technique will still achieve dramatically better fuel economy than the average driver, because the situations that demand fuel-wasting responses will be seen early enough to be managed before they become inevitable. Practice extending your visual horizon on every drive. Identify the next traffic event before it requires a response. Work backwards from that event to determine what the most fuel-efficient response looks like and begin executing it now rather than when the event arrives. Do this on every drive, across every situation, for 30 days. The Toyota engineer said drivers who practice deliberate anticipation for 30 consecutive days without changing any other behavior typically saw fuel economy improvements between 18 and 31% on their regular commutes. Not from a new product, not from a modification, from seeing further ahead and giving themselves the time and space to respond to what they saw without wasting the fuel that panic, surprise, and late reaction always cost. If this video just showed you a path to cutting your fuel bill by an amount that is actually meaningful to your monthly budget, hit that like button and share it with one person you know who is currently complaining about fuel prices. Subscribe now. There is a video on your screen right now that goes deeper into the Japanese maintenance philosophy that keeps these same fuel economy gains working at 100,000 miles and beyond. Click it now, and I will meet you there.